a body thing, you know you have to move, don't you? And then you're from Bloomingtown. That means you're blooming, aren't you? And all this stuff happens. So I go to Virginia Beach. The next thing you know, Francis is saying, I got to get you a meeting with Robert Smith, the director of the Venture Inward magazine. So we go to this Nawab Indian restaurant, which is down in Virginia Beach, a few streets back from the ocean front. I forget what the street is. Anyway, apparently I was sitting in the restaurant and I turned over and looked at him like this. And there's a picture of Edgar Cayce working at his desk and turning and smiling. So he walks in the restaurant and I look at him like this, and it's the spitting image of the photograph. And he says to me, you know, he eventually confessed, he was trying to stay cool. He said, when I saw your face, I almost fell over backwards. You are exactly the same as Edgar Cayce in the way you look. Long story short, I ended up meeting everybody in the ARE. I'm living with a guy who's a Cayce scholar. He starts telling me all this stuff about Cayce because I hadn't really read too much about Cayce. I'd read about the Atlantis stuff, which I found fascinating. But other than that, I knew he was psychic and I felt his work could be trusted, but I hadn't really gotten into it because there's, 500, 600 Cayce books. But here's this guy I'm living with now as a result of the ARE contact who had been best friends with Gladys Davis, who was Cayce's apparently soulmate and secretary. I heard all the inside stories you don't usually hear, including the fact that he'd stepped on a stick and it went through his testicle and one of his testicles was dead. I heard all these stories about what the readings said about Atlantis and how all these people were reincarnations of each other and they kept reincarnating in groups together. And he kept kind of saying, you're probably Edgar Cayce reincarnated. And I'm, oh my God. Then we actually had Tom Johnson, the owner of the Heritage Store, which sells Cayce products, come into the house one night. My God, he looks just like Edgar Cayce. Here we go again, Jesus. So finally, he said, my contact Jim says to the guy I was living with, says, you got to ask your readings. You can't let this go on much longer. By this point, I knew I could trust them. I finally said, I asked it in a very strange way, because when you're in trance, you're trying to get your mind conscious enough that you can actually ask a question, and then you have to sink back down to get the answer. So I said, I would like to incubate a question on my identity here related to Edgar Cayce, because I just couldn't say, was I Edgar Cayce in a past life? Well, the answer comes back, it says, Table Rock, which I don't know why they said that, still don't know. This is our boss. In short, the answer is yes. And then they pulled out the cheesy Spider-Man line, but with the answer comes great responsibility. Oh my God. I was pissed. After I had this reading, I did not want this to be the truth. And then later on, I just said, what the hell, let me pick up Edgar Cayce's astrology chart, the natal chart, and then compare it to my own chart. It's called a biwheel, right? Well, I did that. And we've got moon over moon, Mars over Mars, Mercury over Mercury, Venus over Venus, Sun over Sun, and then Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune are all in these perfect aspect ratios to each other, 30 degrees, 60 degrees, 9 degrees. It was so locked in, precise, we eventually had somebody do an astrology comparison, found out that in a 127-year period after Cayce's death, there's only one time you could possibly be born where it would align that well with his birth chart, and that was my birthday, the exact day, time, location. Furthermore, it was also in the Chinese zodiac year of the ox. The ox. Oh my God. There it is again. So when I saw the natal chart, I literally ran into the bathroom and I'm hovering over the toilet, like ready to throw up. Because what do we know about Edgar Cayce? Cayce had a reading that said, in 1998, Rata, the priest, will return. Meaning Cayce's past life in the Atlantis apparently was this guy who helped design the Great Pyramid. He was one of the chief architects of the Great Pyramid. Rata, he was a prophet who foretold the destruction of Atlantis, fled the island, got into Egypt, and then built this monument based on the technology they had and all this stuff, creating a gateway with this higher entity that was called Ra. Now that's not really in the Casey readings, except in a few places they mention Ra and Rata as two different entities in some prayers, which we have in the book. So then the source tells me, you have to go to the ARE and tell them about this. Oh my God, no way. I finally got dragged kicking and screaming into doing it. I had a meeting with somebody, told him the whole story, and he says, we get somebody in here every week who thinks they're the reincarnation of Edgar Casey. Everybody's hip to this 1998 thing, and when he's going to come back, you're just another number. Get out of here, kid. But he also invited me to sell candy bars at a play they were running called Man of La Mancha. He says, well, you know, let's just get you out in the community and see if anybody else recognizes you. So it's a really funny story, anecdote, to say Edgar Casey returned to the ARE and they gave him a job selling candy bars.
Impersonating Edgar Casey, right?
Yeah. So the last thing in the world I wanted is to be somebody else. How many Elvis impersonators can you mention by name? It's not like this is an honorable thing for me. The ARE did not take me seriously. In fact, this person was very belittling to me and said, well, you know, I found out through the grapevine that the buzz inside the ARE was like, okay, we know this guy did drugs. We know this guy swears. He's young, he's impressionable. There's no use that we can have of him being Edgar Casey reincarnated. It doesn't do us any good, because I was only like 24 years old. I mean, I was young, and yet I'd read 500 books and I'd started to write about this stuff. So in that bitterness of the betrayal from the ARE, I just got more into working with my source, and the source is saying, you have to start taking clients and doing readings for other people. And if you don't do this, you're going to lose the ability to channel. Well, I really didn't want to do that. But by July of 1998, I was in Virginia Beach. Casey had a dream where he was back in Virginia Beach in 1998. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and I'm like thinking, oh, this is wonderful. I end up starting to take clients. The third client I had, this woman comes in, didn't say anything about herself whatsoever. She just sat down and wanted to start the reading. I'm like, well, I really don't want to do that, but okay. I wake up out of the reading and she's totally in tears. She said, your reading described exactly what's going on with my husband, the fact that we're living in opposite ends of the house, you know, why we're fighting, what I'm going to have to do to make it better. I'm just so blown away. I can't thank you enough. Da, 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 da. So, you know, you get this stage fright, but then once it started, it just happens, and it just flows through you. So then the source is saying, well, the other part of the deal was not only do you have to do readings for people, but you have to write a book. I didn't want to write a book either. I finally got a website in February 1999. I had written up some of my preliminary research into Ascension in 1998. I got online in February 99, and in a relatively short time laid out the case, including the photographic comparison of myself to Edgar Casey, started to get some interest on the internet, but I really didn't want to write a book, and I didn't want to be known for that. I got hired on in 2000 to this thing called Time of Global Shift, which was a seminar tour about Ascension, and I was presenting scientific information about 2012 and planetary change. I started to have conferences, and I got on Art Bell, as I said. It was a short visit, then I had another visit again. Long story short, along comes May 2001, Dr. Stephen Greer Disclosure Project. I'd gotten on Art Bell now, I was doing these readings, I had a website, I was making all my money from taking clients, barely surviving because I charged very little at the time. I'm now not doing readings anymore, that's an important thing to point out because I have demand inundation, which some people would call a happy problem, but it got to the point that so many people wanted readings, I just couldn't possibly fill it. I go to the Disclosure Project and I meet 39 top secret witnesses to the UFO thing, and one of them was Sergeant Clifford Stone, who had experienced a direct encounter with extraterrestrials. And they said, well, he asked them, well, what's in it for me? And they said, a new world if you can take it. I remember that, you know, that's what they've been telling me too. So by this point, I had a public presence. I didn't really talk about the reincarnation too much. I'm at this conference. and I'm meeting all these